because we need the father of the whole stream to be watching us. So, okay. Let's welcome you, all of you, at the last session on this data stream, which we have here at the ICRI conference. And this one, as was already announced at the beginning of the whole stream, this one focuses at the national level, and will go through the presentation, which demonstrates how all the higher level ideas are actually projected to the national level, and on the other way around, how the national activities and initiatives are touching and collaborating with the higher level regional and global initiatives. We have 4 speakers covering 3 continents, and we will start in the order which is presented. So we will start with Professor Jörg Surevetter. He is a professor at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, who is currently on leave and serving as the director of the National Federated Data Infrastructure in Germany. So do we have him online? So Jörg, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction and the welcome. Can you hear me? Is the sound okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Slides are also online. So thanks for inviting me and thanks for hosting this session. I think this is an important aspect, as coming together on a global level requires national initiatives, and hopefully we can all work together towards the joint goal of having a better data sharing and improving access to research data. This is the main topic of the National Research Data Infrastructure, in short NFDI, in Germany. I'm the director of the NFDI since March 2020. So our organization was born into the pandemic situation, and having virtual meetings actually was, I think, also beneficial because it allowed us to grow quickly, even though we are widespread across Germany. And also we link to international activities such as, for example, the European Open Science Cloud, which many of you probably know. So let me start with a little motivation. And it's an observation. And this is an observation I had after reading the very well-known FAIR paper. So this is the paper about the principles on how data sharing in the research area can be improved. And FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. Many of you, if not all of you, will know these principles. And I've cited here the DOI of the paper. Now, if you read the paper, you suddenly realize, well, more and more research results are achieved by using existing research data. That sounds very intuitive, but it's far from being trivial and far from being normal. If you go back not so much time, 20 years, 30 years, maybe even 100 years, then researchers like Marie Curie, they did great research and they created their own data in own experiments, had their own hypotheses, derived conclusions from their experiments, and then published a paper. So it was basically a one-woman show or a one-man show. Then a little bit later, it started to become a team effort, and more research infrastructures became important. However, it is not so long ago that the digitization also reached research, and we created large infrastructures for creating research data for specific purposes. But this is not true in all scientific domains. And the National Research Data Infrastructure, NFDI, aims to bring all research domains to the same level and to speed up the use of digital data in all research domains. Now, if you are a researcher, then you know that this next sentence is also true. Significant efforts are still used to find the right data set, to understand it, and to use it for the purpose at hand. And I've been an active researcher, and during that time, it was, well, it started 20 years ago, but then maybe 10, 15 years, I was really actively researching, and we did not have gold standard data sets, for example. We did have access to some data sets. We created them sometimes by ourselves, but then suddenly this machine learning became very big and data sets popped up everywhere. Now, still, a lot of these data sets are distributed. They are maintained not very well, so we have to do something. And this is something probably we all have as a common denominator for our works. Now, the vision of NFDI can be put very simple. Research data sets are fair for all and forever. And of course, these three little words make the story very big. It's for all is touching the effect that that the personal data has to be taken care of. The Data Act is coming up. The DSGVO is regulating access to such data, and we have to ask the question: what does it mean for research? What does it mean for research data? And forever, this one little word is, of course, the big question about long-term preservation. And this is a big story, and for digital data, it is largely unsolved. Now, after this comprehensive introduction to the whole scenario, let me give you an idea of what Germany is currently doing. Germany is funding 19 so-called consortia, NFDI consortia, and they're coming from all different disciplines. And here I brought to you 3 examples out of these 19 consortia. The first one is NFDI for health. You could say it's the National Research Data Infrastructure for Personal Health Data. And the goal here is a comprehensive inventory of German epidemiological, public health, and clinical study data. Because as of now, you don't have a structured access to all these different kinds of data sets. Of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a huge endeavor and a fast-track endeavor to have better access to all the data related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And there we could substantially improve data access in a very short amount of time. So that was a first milestone we reached. Of course, the challenge here is the special data protection requirements of personal health data. Probably all of you know about the challenges. Now, a second consortium is the NFDI for Earth. This is the NFDI consortium for the Earth System Sciences. And here the ultimate goal is a fair, coherent, and open access to all relevant Earth science data to improve the research data management and also, well, to improve the data science methods. Now, the problem here is that it's a quite fragmented community if you look at it at large. And the ultimate aim here is to bring together the various bits and pieces and fragments from the community. And if you do that, you have rapidly increasing data volumes per fragment, but also for the whole community in large. So dealing with large volumes of data is one of the key challenges here. Last but not least, my third example is Punch for NFDI. It's about particles, universe, nuclei, and hadrons for the NFDI. And here, the ultimate goal, again, is to have a federated and fair data science platform. Again, it's the volume of the data, which is a major challenge. But what is also a kind of interesting thing here is that you have a certain irreversibility of the data that is being generated. If you have an experiment which is conducted in a scientific facility here down on Earth, then usually you can repeat the experiment. And if you have the same setting, hopefully you will get the same results. Now, this is completely different if you observe the universe at all, for example, because then the universe has a different state in every single second that is upcoming. So you have to deal with this irreversibility of data generated during experiments. Now, this hopefully gave you a certain feeling for what kind of endeavors we have. Now, we have 19 of these consortia that have been started. They have been carefully selected by hundreds of people co-working in the reviewing process, and they started in 2 rounds in 2020 and in 2021. And from the names, you can, in many cases, guess which disciplines are being covered. So we have NFDI for culture, for example, it's also from the cultural sciences. At the moment, we have a 3rd round, which is upcoming, and hopefully by next year, we will have another round of consortia joining this funding stream. To strengthen the collaboration between the different consortia, we established cross-cutting topics and so-called sections that deal with cross-cutting topics. At the moment, we have 4 sections. It's the common infrastructure, the ethical, legal, and social aspects, metadata terminologies, provenance, and last but not least, training and education. And here we bring together people from different consortia to work on these cross-cutting topics. If you are interested more in these sections, please find the section concepts at Denodo. They are open access. The NFDI Association has 5 organs. The Scientific Senate, Directorate, the Board, and then the Consortia Assembly and the Members Assembly. So we are an organization by ourselves. The heart, you could say, of the association is the Consortia Assembly, because here the 19 consortia come together. The Members Assembly consists of all members, and these are universities, federal government, and all federal states. By the way, these were the founding members. I should have named them first, sorry. We have extra university research institutions such as Fraunhofer, Helmholtz, Leibniz, and Max Planck. And we also have departmental research institutions and further organizations. So, in a nutshell, we are covering across Germany a large diversity of research organizations. The purpose is to guide and coordinate a networked information infrastructure. We want to establish processes and procedures for a standardized RDM, research data management, and we want to have interdisciplinary metadata standards. For that, of course, we collaborate also on the European level, and I named the EOSC before, and there are further standardization initiatives in which we are engaged. Last but not least, I'd like to name also another project, which is or initiative, which is important for us. It's the GaiaX project. And this is a huge consortium mainly dealing with data sovereignty, also on the European level. And NFDI is closely collaborating with GaiaX in a joint project called Fair Data Spaces, where we say, well, we have the expertise on the FAIR principles and how to make data open. And GaiaX has a technology stack to provide data spaces. So it's a technological consortium. By bringing them together, we hope to explore the opportunities for the technology stack from GaiaX for the research domain, and we hope to bring in the expertise of the research domain into the industrial space. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to the fruitful discussions after all the presentations. And now I'm handing over to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jörg. And I don't see any questions online. There is one question. Please, if you can bring the microphone.
Can you go back with the presentation to the NFDI roles? Is not the last one, the previous one? Because my question is if it's any obligation for the researchers in Germany after getting the funds for the research to use this research, whatever data you are or infrastructures you are providing in order to store their data. This is if it's an obligation.
That's a very good question. And in fact, it is the case that the DFG, which is the German Science Association, the German, what is the English name? The Research Foundation. They are funding a lot of research projects. And they recently slightly increased by nudging the demand for researchers to archive their data from projects. However, it is not a law. We cannot force anybody to deposit data, but we try to have very good offers which are oriented towards the user's need, and the users here are the scientific co-workers, and we hope to have the services around data archiving and data provisioning so cool and so good that everybody is just loving to use it. However, at the same time, we slightly increase the pressure to do so. And that is, for example, by the fact that if you apply for a project where you create data, then you have to fill in a data management plan. And of course, it's up to you what you write into such data management plan. But at the end of the day, you have to think about what is my plan to store the data. And of course, if you have an own structure and facility, you can use your own structure and facility. But in many cases, you have discipline-specific archives, and they do a very good job. And I'm working now for more than 10 years on making data citable by assigning DOIs to data sets. So by that, you make data sets citable. And if you cite a data set, you can also get credits by getting citations. So we try to improve also the reward system for researchers, so they have an own interest in sharing their data, and they have an interest not in just sharing their data, but having their data being reused. And this is important, because then you also have an interest to have the right quality of data sets. And by bringing this all together, we hope to create the next level infrastructure for research data management and change the culture towards data sharing also for scientists without having to force them.
Thank you. Is it fine? I mean, we can continue with some discussions during the panel after all four presenters will be ready. So at this moment, thank you once again, Yorba. Stay with us because we will need you for the panel. And we are now symbolically moving across the ocean because I would like to invite Mark Leggott from the Digital Research Alliance in Canada. He is the Director of International Relations there, and he will give us the Canadian perspective. Mark, it's yours.
Thank you, and it's nice to be here and seeing some colleagues that I haven't seen for a while, and nice, of course, to be in a face-to-face environment. And also great to see the progress from York and the team at NFDI. I think York is one of the first people I talked to when I joined the Alliance about a year and a half or so ago. We had a great conversation, so it's nice to see that progress. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach because even though we are similar vintages, NFDI and the Alliance is a different kind of genesis. So we are a not-for-profit organization in Canada. We're almost entirely funded by the Government of Canada, although we do get additional funding from other national partners as well as our members. So we are the national leader, funding agency as well as service provider for digital research infrastructure. And that for us includes advanced research computing, or HPC, research data management, and research software. I also typically throw in a fourth pillar for cybersecurity, which is a responsibility we share with our sibling organization, which is CANARI, which would be the Canadian equivalent of GÉANT. We started in 2019, so we're 2.5 years into our first 5-year mandate. It's been an interesting process, which I may insert some informal comments about the nature of forming an organization from existing organizations. And one thing to bear in mind as I talk about some of our coming initiatives is we have the potential to receive $375 million in funding from our federal government, which has to be matched 60-40 by provinces and institutions in Canada, which is a really important and somewhat, I'll use the informal word dysfunctional at times when you have to find that match for an organization like ours. So the Digital Research Alliance of Canada was originally known by a numbered company name. You'll sometimes see us, even in some of the slides earlier today, as Endrio, which we were known as the new DRI organization because the interim CEO didn't want to go through the process of naming the organization before we had our first CEO. So once we had our first CEO, we went through a process, and the community came up with a preference for the name, the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So prior to the current state, CANARI, which looks after our internet backbone for the higher education, also funded the organization I headed up before I joined the Alliance Research Data Canada. We also provided funding to an initiative called Portage, which was out of the academic libraries in Canada that's looked after data management. CANARI also funded research software, and our sibling organization, CFI, provided some funding for software, as did Compute Canada. And Compute Canada was the national organization for advanced research computing. So when the government decided that they were going to, the organization or the ecosystem needed change, they went to an existing organization called the Leadership Council for DRI and asked them to write 3 reports, one on data management, one on advanced research computing, and one on coordination of the ecosystem. Based on that set of reports, the decision was made to create a new organization, hence the alliance. And there was also an announcement of an investment of $572.5 million into DRI in a budget in 2018. So as I said, we're 2.5 years old. Creating a new organization out of existing organizations is really hard. So there's been some bumps and dips and valleys along the way. In addition to that federal investment from the government agency ICED, we also have the potential to get additional funding from other national organizations. And one example is a project we're just starting is to put in place 3 new AI data centers with an injection of $65 million from our federal government and partners. So there's other opportunities for additional funding to build up the DRI in Canada. So this is what it looks currently. It's more simplified. There's fewer organizations and fewer kind of funding pipelines for the same things, but essentially those existing organizations, Research Data Canada, Compute Canada, and Portage merged into the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold, so. And in that bottom block, you'll see the names of some of the services that have been defined as national services and are being funded and developed by the Alliance. And I won't go into detail on these, but I'm certainly happy to talk about some of the services and HPC centers that we are funding. This is a very complicated slide, simply designed to portray the complexity of the ecosystem in Canada and the fact that we started out on the left-hand side with a long survey, which to our surprise, we got over 1,800 responses from researchers across the country. We received over 100 white papers highlighting what different communities in Canada felt were important initiatives in the DRI ecosystem. From those inputs, we created over 200 initiatives that we felt would address the complexity of the needs that were expressed. And then based on those initiatives, we went through an exercise to consolidate them down into a set of 25-ish initiatives. And those 25 initiatives are what we've gone forward with in a proposal for the final 2 years of our 5-year mandate. There were dozens of these kinds of diagrams, but this is from the survey that we did. And the reason why I like to show this one is it just shows you that the research community basically said everything is important to us. And to some degree, almost everything is equally important. The one smaller one of quantum computing, between the time we did the needs assessment, where it was one of the lower ranked, and when we submitted our funding proposal, quantum suddenly became a higher priority. So these things can be quite dynamic. I knew this was going to happen. So a couple of comments. Again, integrating existing organizations can be very difficult, especially like Compute Canada when they've been around for over 25 years. We are a bit late in developing a strategy for spending the funds that are available and achieving the matching funds that are necessary to move forward. So that's why we're kind of consolidating our activities in terms of funding down to the final 2 years. But I have a glass here, thanks. But we've essentially come to the realization that the vested interests, whether it's an existing HPC host site or data services or whatever it is, it's very hard to kind of do a complete tabula rasa and undertake a new approach to funding research infrastructure at a national level. So this will just give you a sense of what we have planned for our final 2 years in our 5-year mandate. It's more than the amount that was indicated previously because it includes matching funds. And with that first sub-bullet, you can see around 250 million on renewal of HPC data centers. Tells you that the majority of that funding will be spent on high-performance computing. And that was one of the challenges that the community let us know about, was they felt that the HPC elephant would completely hide the other priorities of data management and research software. And unfortunately, it's the nature of funding research infrastructure. It's easier for governments to fund short-term capital costs rather than long-term HQP or personnel. We are planning to have a couple of funding calls for innovation in research infrastructure and research software. So that gives you a sense of the kinds of things that we have in our plan going forward. At the same time, we've developed what we call a new service delivery model, which is essentially a way to define services, because we are able to fund national services up to 100%. We can fund regional services up to 30%, and we can fund nothing of institutional services. So the ecosystem has a vested interest in how we define what a national, regional, or institutional service is, because obviously the funding impact is considerable. So with this new classification, we're in the process of defining at least an initial suite of services that would be defined as national, regional, or institutional. We also have a set of foundational practices and things like service level objectives and service level agreements that would be put in place to ensure the long-term support for these. The other thing, there were literally hundreds of working groups, task groups, expert groups in the previous bodies that had been working for any number of years. So one of the other challenges we had is, how do we achieve some form of national support and or governance to allow these different groups to continue to do their work and inform not just the work and the services that the Alliance provides, but also our future strategies. So that process has started now. And again, when you've got a couple of hundred existing working groups and committees and bodies, it becomes an interesting challenge to figure out how to move forward with those in a new funding model. My focus is both international partnerships and what's coming in terms of new standards and technology, so I look after both. So I'm interested in the kinds of partnerships with international organizations that can help the Alliance do various things. Obviously, the most important thing is deliver the best services to our researchers and our collaborators internationally, but also how we can take creative approaches to achieving that matching formula of 60-40 overall. So for reasons, the reasons that are depicted here is why I'm engaging with the EOSC, EGI, CSC, and other organizations in Europe, especially in the current timeline, in order to determine how we can possibly transform the way research infrastructures are funded internationally. And this comes back to the previous comment in the previous session about the challenges of funding things like long-term preservation and the fact that our funding agencies tend to be focused at the national level, as they have been for a long time. And how do we change those national innovation funding pipelines to become more transformative to support research infrastructures globally? So I'm interested in all kinds of partnerships and facilitating those. So if you're interested in working with either at a high level MOU kinds of partnerships where we share information, or specific partnerships where we do pilots, test beds to try to see how global research infrastructure interoperability and those kinds of things can be achieved. That's one of the reasons I'm here. So that's it for me. I'll stop before I lose my voice completely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and especially for your effort to fight your post-flu syndromes. We have, I don't see any message, any questions online. Do we have a question, or we leave Mark to recover after his speech? I think that it will be better. So we will continue our travel across the globe. And now we will move across another ocean, and we will get to Japan. And I would like to invite and present Dr. Yasuhiro Murayama-san, who is currently working as a research executive director at the National Institute of Information and Communications Technology in Japan. And he is also a member of several expert panels. And in fact, he has been with us in Europe as a member of one of the first high-level policy groups, which in fact set up the whole scope for the EOSC in Europe. So Murayama-san, if you are available, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. And my talk will cover the policy issue and some practice trials issue on open science and research data infrastructure from Japan's viewpoint and Japan's experiences, especially from my experience viewpoint. And so my story could be a mixture of some science council and the G7 governmental policy area and some institutional issue. I would like to add that Japan once had international contribution about the data enterprise world data system. My institution hosted the international program office for 10 years, and now University of Tennessee was handed. Okay. And yeah, so almost all of you know that open science has a various facets, and you can see the data issues and open access, open source, and student science, etc. And here we focus on the data here. And open data was a keyword. The open was very easy word, and now as you know, the community has developed a new concept and principles like so fair principle, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and so on. And especially about the research data, we need to be careful about handling research data because decision making about the preservation or discarding the research data, we need a high-level evaluation and decision making by the professionals, the experts. So it's an important issue too. And behind those stories, we have a long history about scientific information management and the preservation on the print media, printing technology. As you know, after the invention of printing press by Gutenberg, the UK and France has invented the new mechanism of scientific journals in 17th century, and some people call it the first open science revolution. And after the 300 years and more, now we are welcoming a new era. And along those 300 years, our scientific community and related sectors, industrial sectors, commercial and student and education sectors has developed its scientific research and scientific system ecosystem is brilliantly working so far. And as you know, for instance, the aircraft or the cell phones, all the brand new technology has been developed and invented based on the scientific knowledge on the printed media so far. And on the other hand, electronic media, so digital technology starting as if we can assume the start point is ENIAC by von Neumann, 1946. Digital technology has a shorter history than the 100 years. And we are now on the way to develop the new ecosystem on the digital technology. But on the other hand, this kind of the librarians and the publishers and also researchers has combined ecosystem on the print media. So we have two kinds of the cultures and two kinds of the mindsets. And now some people say that this is the second open science evolution. Okay. And after those history, now the Japanese government now are trying to move, trying to develop new science scheme on the digital infrastructure, digital data infrastructure, triggered by the 2017 GA Science Ministers meeting under the UK presidency. They agreed open science research data. And this was a strong force for the Japanese government, and who called external scientific experts like me to investigate how to promote open science in Japan. And we have successfully held the G7 Science Ministers meeting in 2016 under the Japanese presidency. And I gave some introductory talk there to the science ministers on how important the open science is and how the scientific data are the common asset for to all the human beings and the global scale sciences. And so they agreed to create the open science working group under the G7 science ministers framework, co-chaired by European Union and Japan. And Japan is not, this is my personal sense, and I think at that time that people didn't think that Japan is very advancing country about the open science. However, I believe they accepted the Japanese officials and scientists' enthusiasm to work out, trying to work out about open science. Okay. And next year, 2017, under the Italian presidency, science ministers agreed two big focuses. One is the incentives and the rewards for openness of the research ecosystem, even addressing evaluation of research careers. This is really important about the research assessment and scientist lives, and also infrastructure. This is a big issue here, of course, about the research data. And now those things are on the tables of the political international science policy discussions. And about the science and economy or society around the data, this is an example taken from the European Union and Japan. And in EU has set up, as you know, digital single market strategy since 2015, and the European Open Science Cloud, EOSC, was allocated under this economic strategy. This was very much impressive to me and impressive to some of the Japanese experts, and because we understand, or at least I understood, that European society recognized that the scientific database, scientific data infrastructure should be the societal infrastructure to stimulate and enhance the digital economy of Europe in future. This is a really important viewpoint. On the other hand, so Japanese government has also national science technology strategy too, and we are having this keyword Society 5.0. It is a kind of the super smart society targeting resilience and well-being of society with the new technology, integration of the cyber and the physical technologies. And the open science was newly added to the new plan. And but now there are our challenge is, or at least our science community's challenge is how to make the so mutual trust between science and society, science and economy. That is an important viewpoint in my sense. All right. And under the cabinet decision, the cabinet office called their expert panel of open science promotion, and I was a part of its organizer group, and we make so active discussion in this panel, and we have successfully published the first national report of open science principles in Japan, 2015. This was very much epoch-making document in Japan, and following them, then we made a further discussion about the guidelines for the data policy of the national research institutions and for trusted data repository. Fortunately, we included some concept of the core trust seal, trustworthy data repository certification concept too. And the Cabinet Office also worked out for creating a new funding program called the Moonshot Program, addressing explicitly research data management aligned with the open science principles. Those are very top-down approach and the big issues. And also from the academy, the Science Council of Japan has been setting several committees about the open science, changing topics time to time, and they have been working out, and gradually they're developing and expanding the concept of the open science in the academic area. Also, disciplinary data committees have been working out gradually increasing in the various areas, including informatics, bioinformatics, earth science, and etc. And I'm taking a lead of some committees and in informatics and earth science too. Okay. All right. And those are the kind of the summary of the Japanese government work actions and so data policy guideline and the data management plan being implemented in public funders in their respective ways now, and also the data management infrastructure is one of the big topics there, and the NII, National Institute of Informatics, has been worked out for developing the research data cloud, NII research data cloud. And the right-hand side, this is a very simple schematic of the system that they have been developing a publication platform, discovery platform, and research data management platform with their close interaction with the Ministry of Education and Science and Cabinet Office. And of course, they are having international interaction with, including IOSC too. And on the other hand, from the other bottom-up approach, the several universities are trying to develop their own data repository on campus, and those are they are studying the various foreign universities and US universities, UK universities, and French universities, policies, and they're seemingly going good way. And so next challenge is how to make a good, happy marriage between this kind of bottom-up approach and the top-down approach in the future sometime. All right. And this is a detailed view graph. Oh, I'm sorry. Just let me go back And the biggest challenge is, as you know, the how to realize a community engagement in those activities, especially with the cultural change and change of the scientific norms and in the research communities. And this is really struggling target. Okay. And this is a detailed view graph of the NII Research Data Cloud. And their computer scientist has been very intensively and diligently working out to develop the software for publication platform, the data management platform, etc. And but the original model of this system has been article repository, and so one of their challenges is includes to have enough size of the storage space for the scientific data repository. Yeah, it's okay. I'm running out of time. So the last slide is, so you can see that this is a slide from the Jeffrey Bolton's past talk, and the open data iceberg is shown there. And in philosophy, we can say that the open science iceberg too, and the technology part is very much visible over the sea surface, and the people and the society are relatively easily invest to the technology part, but the real change of the society or community, and we need to look at the how to so changes there are undersea part of components of the processes, the organization, and people with the various challenges, ecosystems, the funding, skills, incentives, the mindset, etc. So Japan is also very much happy to work with the international experts towards these worlds. Thank you very much. This is it. I think this is the end of my talk.
Thank you very much, Murayama-san. Thank you.
Thank you.
And please stay with us because we need you for the panel discussion at the end of this session. But any urgent question? If not, we will continue our flight over the globe, going now from Japan back to Europe, and within Europe back to Brno. And I would like to invite here Jana Klanova. She's a professor of the Masarykova University, and she's also director of the Resetox research infrastructure and currently a coordinator of the recently approved IRENE research infrastructure at the European level. Jana, the floor is yours. I think it's over there.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all the heroes who stayed with us since early morning until now, because you were starting really early this morning. So the IRENE, the new infrastructure that was added to the ESFRI roadmap last fall for the 2021 update, is the research infrastructure supporting the research on human exposome. Those of you who attended the plenary section this morning focused on addressing the global challenges in the area of environment probably saw the contribution of Gary Miller, and he explained everything about what the human exposome is and means for those who did not. Briefly, the human exposome stands for the universe of all factors that can affect the human health, including the environmental, social, psychological stress and everything. And it's kind of complement of the functional genomics. So we are now talking not only about the genome-wide association studies, but also exposome-wide association studies, because the chemical components and other stressors around us can affect our DNA, metabolism, the microbiome in our bodies in many different ways. So it means at the bottom of the green circle, you can see what we call external environment, all the factors, the chemicals, stressors, our lifestyle, food, contaminated air or water. And the internal, the upper part of the circle, says internal exposome, which means how this is reflected in the biochemistry of our own body. What kind of biomarkers we have to trace the changes in our bodies, because only the changes that are traceable are probable to cause any adverse outcome pathways. You can imagine that it is a challenge to study such a holistic or complex mixture of all factors, and it requires the interdisciplinary studies, but also longitudinal studies. We ideally should follow the life cycle, starting with the pregnancy of the woman up to the adulthood or the age of the participants. So Luděk said that we are coordinating this new research infrastructure at the European level, but of course we do have the experience from the national environment, because the RECETOX research infrastructure has been at the national roadmap already since 2012, linking the environmental and health domain and trying to develop this communication between two different domains. And it was supported recently by 3 projects from the Horizon 2020 widening scheme, the teaming, twinning, and ERA-chair, that help us to build the good links between the European institutions operating in the environmental health and public health domain. And pretty much our research agenda is defined by these 3 edges of the triangle, talking about healthy planet, healthy individual, and sustainable society, and all the interactions between 3 edges. And because we are a university facility, it means fighting for the healthy future, not only with our research, but also education, application to both public and private sector, and having an important relationship with the public, because these studies really, we desperately need a collaboration with the people who are willing to be part of our longitudinal population studies. Therefore, we developed something we call Living Lab, which is the collaboration between the research institutions and the public, but also all the other regional players, like the Brno City, regional authorities, various ministries. We are UNEP collaborating center, WHO collaborating center. And it is also reflected in the activities and data that we are collecting, because as soon as you want to communicate to various stakeholders, you also have to develop the communication pipelines. And the willingness of those stakeholders to communicate and collaborate with us is reflected in the regional innovation strategy of the South Moravian region, because this Living Lab became one of important goals of our regional strategy for the next 5 years. And you can see that the triangle defining this regional strategy is pretty much reflecting our triangle, connecting, you know, the healthy society, climatic or environmental changes, and the digital technologies as a representative of the society. Since the very beginning, we developed several core facilities of the research infrastructure that became the part of really the national roadmap of the large research infrastructures. The first facility we developed were accredited laboratories, because we are most concerned about toxic chemicals, so we really had to develop the high throughput accredited laboratory that can report reliable results about contamination of various environmental matrices, but also contamination of the human bodies. The next step was development of the large-scale and long-term monitoring networks. We are currently operating a lot of the air and water monitoring stations. Those are represented by the blue dots in the yellow map up in the picture. And we developed those networks to support the United Nations Environment Programme and the global conventions like the Stockholm Convention, because they are calling for the global monitoring programs to support the effectiveness evaluation of the convention. Once we did it, we really had to develop also the information systems, because we need to have some means to collect and harmonize and assess the data coming from various monitoring networks across the world. But because we are serving our stakeholders, we also had to develop not only the databases, but also the communication tools, data interpretation and visualization tools. So this put the ground for our third research infrastructure of the information platforms. And currently, our platform is the major information system of the Stockholm Convention, and the only place where you can find all the data from the global monitoring networks. And in the last 10 years, we invested a lot into development of the population studies. Because if you really want to detect the harmful effects of the environmental factors on human health, you need to have the longitudinal measurements and the population data. We are very lucky because in this region there is already a very long tradition of the population cohort, and it is very exceptional in the region of Central and Europe and Eastern Europe, because majority of the population cohorts are in Scandinavia, or some are in the Western Europe. Great is of course in UK, something in Spain, but nothing really in this region. But in Brno, the first birth cohort was already recruited in 60s, and they are still following this cohort. But our most important resource is the ELSPA cohort that was recruited in early 90s. And note the date, because it is the first generation that was born in this region after the Iron Curtain went down. So they grew up during the period of important social economic changes. And because this was a part of the large pan-European study that was focused on the identification of the factors that are behind of development of various diseases of small children, this is very important reference data for other countries. So 10 years ago, we took responsibility for this original cohort. We are now following it up. We set up the next generation cohort. So currently we are collaborating with our partners in university hospitals, recruiting the next generation. Through our partnership with University College London, we also share the responsibility for the aging cohort that was recruited already 20 years ago, and it is still being followed. We still have 40,000 participants across the Czech Republic, Poland, Lithuania, and Russia that are being followed. And of course, we had to build the resources to support such research. In one hand, the laboratory and biobanking resources, and some of you had a chance to visit our biobank during our tours on Tuesday and Wednesday, but it also means to develop the proper data resources. And this is kind of scheme how the databases and information system that are connecting our data must look like. So of course, in the center of it, there are laboratories, and we need some laboratory system to connect different types of omic laboratories, trace laboratories, the toxicological laboratories. But then the laboratory system is needed already at the very beginning when we are recruiting the cohort participants, taking some personal data from them, and it is clear that we have a lot of sensitive data because this is about the longitudinal assessment of people from the cohorts. So then, we take the samples go to the biobank. We have quite advanced biobanking system that allows longitudinal storage of millions of samples from various studies. And the same data are coming from the environmental side, where we have these multiple environmental monitoring studies in different countries that we are storing and reporting to different data presentation tools. And then this is only beginning, because then we have the data coming from different analytical technologies, providing target and non-target data that need the specific data processing tools to reach the final element of data interpretation. Interpretation means various types of modeling, the pharmacokinetic modeling, describing your internal distribution of the chemicals, the distribution modeling for the environment, adverse outcome modeling that can really provide a mechanistic data about the toxic mixtures and which type of mixtures are suspect to cause specific health problems. This is just a scheme how our pipelines look like, because once you try to develop the non-target analysis, you end up with huge piles of the data, and the pipelines have 30, 40 steps for the curation of the data, identification of the peaks, linking them to the annotated laboratories. And this is something we've been working on in collaboration with the Columbia University in US in the last couple of years already. And because this is the investment that shouldn't be duplicated in every other university, we made all our pipelines publicly available through the Galaxy pipelines of Elixir. So this is the work under development for GC analytical instruments as well as LC instruments, and we are trying to set up the collaboration across several universities, and this should be one of the important outcomes of the EIRENE infrastructure. Of course, this partnership was developed throughout the implementation of multiple European projects. Just to mention two joint programs, Human Biomonitoring for Europe that was completed this spring, or ERA-Planet, ERA-Net, were two European projects that were heavily focused on collecting the large-scale data, linking different domains, linking them to the satellite data, and making use of the data that is already available. It should be recognized that this is not only scientific knowledge, as I showed in the first picture, but this is very much aligned with the European priorities, because all of these elements are relevant for Green Deal, because Green Deal has a challenges like zero pollution. So to assess the zero pollution, this is where the Exposome approach is needed, but we also have the cancer mission, and it is specifically said in the cancer white paper that we need to focus on prevention, and the exposome factors are a very important element of the prevention. Also, we must be aware that the chemical exposure is important element in the global crisis, because we usually think about climate change crisis and biodiversity and chemical pollution and health crisis, but these are just the elements on one crisis, because the chemistry plays a role in the climate change. It has an effect on population, and it is reflected in the biodiversity loss. It has an important importance for development of the diseases, including the COVID pandemics. So in the blue circle represents the pillars of our EIRENE database, with the central importance of the laboratory, but also linkage to the existing and new infrastructures in the area of environmental studies, the clinical studies, data management, and interpretation. So this is the structure of the EIRENE infrastructure, and to the left and to the right, there are also the existing infrastructures that we are either collaborating with already or planning the collaboration, because we want to reuse as many resources as possible. But of course, it makes the challenge of handling the data even more complex, because each of those infrastructure is operating in very different data universe. This is only the picture taken from current ESFRI roadmap, showing where we are and what we want to achieve, but I would like to attract your attention to those two circles at the bottom of the picture, showing the landscape of environmental domain and health domain. And you can see that EIRENE infrastructure is mentioned multiple times in both of those landscape analyses, because as I said, the chemistry is relevant for water and air and food and oceans, but also for all types of the diseases and for the neurodevelopment, healthy aging, and all those health outcomes that those health infrastructures are interested in. There is one important resource we are trying to align with, which is the new European partnership. It was the first Horizon Europe partnership that was initiated in the middle of this year, and it's called PARC, Partnership for Chemical Risk Assessment. It's a huge animal with more than 200 partners, with a total of something like 300 million euros. And it is trying to really bring the ends together, the environmental exposures, toxicity, risk assessment, safe by design. The important thing is that 3 out of 9 work packages are focused on research infrastructures. One is really on mapping the existing resources in the area of environmental monitoring and biological monitoring. One is specifically focused on data, and the last one is focused on data interpretation towards the safe by design, so basically to the industrial applications and chemical safety. So we are really trying to use the partnership that contains pretty much every relevant partner in Europe to bring together the loose ends and come to the agreement what is the best way to handle our data to make it happen. Of course, the collaboration on the EOSC platform is very important for us too, because different countries have different approaches, so it is important that we also use EOSC resources to accommodate enough capacities for such a challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jana. If there are any urgent questions, I have probably to go to the microphone. Any urgent questions? I don't see anything online. I would like to invite both our present on-site presenters to sit over there, and also to ask our colleagues with remote availability to be somehow properly displayed on the screen. And now we have a last panel of this session, and I would like to start the panel with, in fact, opening once again the floor to your questions, because you had the opportunity to see them, and I see already the first question coming.
Thank you. That was a great panel. I was really impressed with the range of experience that everyone had, and I'm curious, because so many of you were intricately involved in creating national infrastructures, what would you do differently now, knowing what you know now, based on what you knew before?
Okay, the question is what you learned. So,
I don't think I would do anything different, actually. It's a steep learning curve, of course. At the beginning we had very weak idea of what the research infrastructure is when we were building it around 2010. We started with the elements that we know very well, like the chemical laboratory, and then we were adding things one by one. It was great that it was all built from the bottom, so we were adding the elements in the small steps. We were not overwhelmed, and now our case really serves as a model for building EIRENE. So we are showing how we did things and how we combined it, and we are trying to identify the best ways for other national hubs.
Thank you. Mark, if you want to add.
I think I would make sure in the Alliance's case that we had clear rules of participation and expectations from our community about those rules of participation and what the outputs would be. I think the biggest issue, as I kind of alluded to, was simply the delay in getting on with upgrading the HPC infrastructure and doing the kinds of things that the money was meant to do, because the process of engagement and hearing from everyone and all of those things that we need to do took so long. And I think that was something that was unfortunate. I would also change the funding formula. You know, it sounds good to have funding, but when you have to match it 60-40 across your total funding envelope, including, you know, your CEO's salary and my salary and all these other components that you can't really match easily, becomes very challenging. And I know the other organizations that I've seen internationally and how they work that don't have that, they've been able to get off the mark immediately and have huge impact. So I think that's a challenge that's not necessarily unique to Canada, but defines the Canadian way.
We can get to that later on during the discussions. But Jörg, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. Since we are still in the process of establishing NFDI, maybe this question is a little bit early, but of course, now I would say so far many things worked very well, given that we have such a large and distributed network, and given that we had the pandemic situation to ramp up all these activities. I think it is fair to say that we progressed really, really nicely. What I would do differently, get more money from the very beginning. So the more we are working on these issues, the more it becomes evident that, of course, the whole architecture, that's the technical architecture, the conceptual architecture, and also the network architecture, that has some blank spots that we are now identifying. However, at the same time, I have to say, it would have been really difficult to identify these blank spots. Again, for us, it's also a steep learning curve, and we must make the best out of that. And one of the things is that in Germany, we now have the NFDI, which is bringing together all the communities in consortia. And in a different funding stream, we have NHR centers, which are national high-performance computing centers. And of course, both initiatives are intertwined. But since we started with different funding streams, yeah, we now have to align each other. Maybe this could have been done a bit earlier, but this is really a minor comment, fairly spoken.
Yeah. And Murayama-san, any comment on this?
Yes, let me add a little bit different comment, maybe, but maybe we need to be careful about so disciplinary differences of the advancement of the open science principle or actions of the scientists or data managers. And for instance, in the life science, as you know, for instance, INSTC, if I remember correctly, in Japan, we have our DNA data bank Japan, and Europe has a European DNA databases, and the US has a US databases, and they have a long history of the alliance and the very interoperable use of the data. But for instance, in space science, and they are now in a very much struggling phase to work out to make interoperability. So, yeah, we cannot say that calmly so easily about the infrastructures and various kinds of infrastructure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. More questions from the audience? Oh, no? Okay, we have few questions. Oh, there is, sorry, please.
Yeah, could you let me know how, now it's catching. So yeah, just interested to know how you manage resource allocations or deciding, which projects can use, the majority of your resources.
Yeah, that's a very nice question. Jana, will you start?
We started to develop this infrastructure about 12 years ago. And it was since the very beginning related to the National Roadmap of Research Infrastructures. And of course, each country has a very different strategy and a very different way how being placed into the national roadmap relates to really being able to reach some resources. Luckily, in the Czech Republic, there is a part of money that is distributed as a fundamental funding for the research infrastructures. So in the beginning, it was really tiny, but then throughout the time when we were adding more and more functions for the basal, strategic development, we could use it. But majority of it was European structural and investment funds. We were lucky that the Czech Republic became eligible for ESIF funds in 2010. So we got the first project between 2010 and 13. That one was partially also for development of the research infrastructure. Then during the second programming period, the part of the ESFRI or ESIF funding was also the money for further development of the research infrastructures. So we were able to combine the research money because we got the project for new excellent teams and the project for the research infrastructures. Then I said 3 years ago we were lucky to get these 3 projects from the horizon widening, so that the teaming project, the condition of the teaming project is that it has to be topped up with the national funding, and again our government uses the ESIF funding, so it's out of 30 million for the teaming, 15 is coming from Europe and 15 is coming from ESIF. And of course we combined it with numerous Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe funds that help to develop the collaboration and human resources.
Yeah. Thank you, but if I understood properly the question was slightly different, and that was about allocating resources from the infrastructure to those who are coming. Like if you have more people than you have the capacity, how you do this prioritization. Am I right? Yeah. No problem.
The regular procedure, we have the open access system, so any user can write a short project explaining what he or she needs. Of course, very different capacities are allocated to sharing data, to laboratory capacities, to sharing the samples from the biobank. But basically always the first step is the feasibility, whether we are capable of providing such service. The second is the scientific quality. So we have the scientific board that is deciding. But of course, we are still under the development. So the oldest services are the lab services, and we are trying to be open to everyone who can come and spend some time, because the training is also important part. Of course, we have limited capacity for providing really the analytical services, not limited for sharing data. All our data are being shared.
Mark, thank you.
Maybe just one example, because our profile with the various pillars is complex, but for access to HPC resources, there's a standard process, but it starts with you creating an account as a researcher, and that account creation gives you a standard level of compute and storage. And then if you need more, or if you need a lot more, there are different processes for a little bit more and a lot more. We call them the RAC, resource allocation. So there's a peer review committee, there's a technical and a research component to the peer review. 90-some% of researchers that request HPC resources get some, but it's a smaller number of those that get the resources they asked for. So there is a balancing equation that is used. So that's an example of how we do it. And I think it's done very similarly here in the Czech Republic and some of the other European countries as well.
I think, thank you for that. I think that the challenge is, we already know a little bit about how to allocate the compute resources, but how to allocate, and that's where I'm looking to Jörg, because in his presentation, he promise that the NFDI will be forever. And this is the real challenge, how to deal with the infinity. So please, your comments.
I did not promise.
No, but you presented
I
it. Yeah,
raised
I
the
know.
question.
And forever is last 1 second. I caught it that well as well. But
We have to answer the question, and maybe per data set, how long do we store data sets? Sometimes we only need them for fragments of seconds, for example, in certain processes. And then you process the data and you only keep the processed data, for example. So you don't keep the raw data because it's just too much. That is one example. Another example is where you have legal obligations to delete data after a certain amount of time. So you should not store the data for a longer period than is foreseen. And basically this raises the question, how long do we store data and which data do we store for how long? And I think this is not an easy answer. So we have to set up a process to answer this question for the data sets. And it should become a standard process. This is my vision, actually, that it becomes a standard process, that this question is well understood, that the options are well understood, probably also economically, but certainly conceptually, and that then archives and researchers have a choice, and they can make a choice according to their needs, but also according to the to the surrounding legal frameworks and other frameworks that apply.
I mean, I must admit that personally, I would be very much interested how far this discussion is within your already existing consortia, whether they are already discussing this or whether they are just at the initial phase and this is something which will definitely appear to them, but may not be so urgent at this moment. So are the consortia?
So there are some research communities that have already asked this question very explicitly. So some of my examples came from the astronomy, for example, where you generate huge volumes of data and you simply cannot store all the data. It's economically not viable, so it does not hold. In other cases, in the social sciences, you have person-related data, and sometimes you have a restriction how long you can store the data, and after that you have to delete the data. So these are practical examples that already exist. However, we are now pushing this question into all kinds of different corners of the scientific system. That means we raise awareness for the question, and we share experiences how we actually deal with this question.
Thank you very much. Murayama-san?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a difficult issues around the, including various aspects of the open science difficulties, and even for selecting what kind of data should be subject to the long-term preservation, we don't have the certain established review process defined. And as you know, publishing the data journals and the data articles, and there are a review process about what kind of the data and the data has this important importance and this potential, etc. And maybe it can be part of this kind of review. But also in past, let me address that the World Data System of the International Science Council has created after the 50 years legacy of the World Data Center and the FAGS, Federation of Astronomical Geophysical Data Services. And the ICRI made a review process. I believe I don't have the certain material record of how they make a decision, which data should be preserved for over 50 years in IGY era, 1957 to 1958. But at that time, science community made a decision which data should be preserved for long term. And so from now on, we are having an increasing size of the data, and it's new challenge for the science community and for the society and funders too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the audience? I mean, if not, I will continue with something which we kind of prepared with the panelists. And one of the things is that this last session is in fact involved in national activities, which means that the people here should be closest, from some perspective at least, to be closest to the actual researchers. And one question which I have to the panelists is what they think are the major obstacles or it may be mind obstacles for the researchers to actually jump in and share their data. What are the worries and how we can overcome them or how we can help them to overcome these kind of worries? So, I mean, either Jana, you can be the last one.
I think it is because the financing of research doesn't really support collaboration, but it supports more competition. And we are all forced to go for the best publications, best grants. There is nothing that supports the collaboration except maybe the research infrastructures. So research infrastructures is one of the exceptional means where we are really trying hard to put together resources and develop something bigger. But then it is very often viewed by the national governments as something that is terribly expensive and not competitive enough that we are investing for such a long time with no visible outcomes. So they have difficulties understanding why we need such a long financing if the most important outcome is not really, the best publication. And I don't know what we can do about it. I think we have to think about ways how to present it, how to communicate it, how to show the impact. I've noticed that this is now a big issue at the national and European level, trying to come up with KPIs and the ways how to make the research infrastructures, including data infrastructures, more visible. But we really have to think about it because none of this will be feasible. And one more note. We had in those days a lot of discussions of EOSC, and I've noticed that there are very different approaches in different countries. Some of our national nodes would ask, what is EOSC? I've never heard about it, almost. And I've noticed that the strategy that is being applied here in the Czech Republic is very good because the coordinators decided to use the research infrastructures because they are already there. They already understand the value of collaboration and sharing. They also know a lot about challenges and obstacles, and they are really trying to drive things forward. Because if you just approach the general community at the same time, they have much less experience and much less willingness for sharing.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I wouldn't add much either, other than to say, I think the challenge, as Jana said, is that it's a competitive ecosystem, and I think more importantly, it's a competitive ecosystem with the scarcity of the fundamental component that researchers think they need in order to carry out their research, which is research funding. And in reality, I think if the open data movement were to succeed and all of that data were to be truly open, if you look at a kind of Maslow's hierarchy in the context of a researcher, the bottom part is data. So if there's no scarcity of data, then researchers can do whatever research they want. And some of them will need the big research infrastructures and the complex requirements that allow them to do the type of research they do. But ultimately, I think we're in that catch-22 moment where a competitive process means researchers hold on to their data so they can get the next grant. And we need to get ourselves to the point where researchers let their data go so that others can make use of it and allow that data ecosystem to flourish.
Okay, thank you. Jörg, do you want to comment?
Yes, much of what has been said, I subscribe to. And therefore, I would highlight an interesting additional point, and that is the question of failure tolerance. Sometimes it's a lack of failure tolerance. So if you have data and you don't want to give them to someone else because someone else could find an error, for example, in the data. And as long as you don't have the feeling that this is a good thing, you probably will not share the data. However, if you come into a situation where community feedback on data reveals errors, deals with errors, and makes it a positive statement. Yes, I found an error, but isn't it cool? We can correct it, and we still can, and we can find even further interesting stuff. Then probably people would be more willing to share their data. And I think if this is combined with a reward system, so that for sharing data and for reusing data, the people who provide the data are being rewarded, that can make a true difference. So failure tolerance plus a reward system. Actually, I've been working now for almost 10 years on such a reward system. And many other people do as well, by the way, and that is by making datasets citable. So you assign a PID, for example, a DOI, you assign a metadata schema, as we all know, this is part of the FAIR principles, and you make this, you publish this. And then the same thing happens as with publications. Someone else takes the data, uses the data, and hopefully says, I'm using this data set. And this has many advantages, of course, because then you can replicate an experiment much easier. It's not self-guaranteed, by the way, that you can replicate, but it makes it much easier by just knowing which data set has been used for a particular experiment. And then sometimes even you know the version of the data set which has been used, and maybe what kind of pre-processing has been applied to the data set. So you're in a much better position to replicate such an experiment. And then if you do that, then suddenly in the reference list, you also have a reference to the data set. And that leads to an increase of citations in the currently running citation counting systems, which again increases the likeliness that you will be recognized as someone who's well known and reputed, and maybe it increases your chance of another position, maybe a tenure position or a professorship. And so I think this really is deep into the scientific processes. So these ideas are embedded deeply into the scientific processes that we have, and that's why it's maybe not so easy to quickly change it. But NFDI is one of the initiatives, many initiatives, like also the others who have been presented here, and there are many others who are working on that. So maybe the next generation of researchers already grows up with a mindset, sharing data is cool, I'm being rewarded for sharing my data, and I benefit from others having shared their data. And that, from my perspective, that would be an ideal situation.
Yeah, thank you. And before I comment, Murayama-san, your comment?
Thank you. Allow me to echo to some part of this York's address. That was very much important. That data citation, etc. That's that we need to recognize that we are in a transition phase of the from the former science scheme to the new open science scheme. And so for instance, as you know, for instance, young scientist or associate professor staying in the lab to the midnight to manage the data set. But the professor doesn't think it is a part of his achievement of the science. It's just a part of the lab's jobs, part of the lab's job. But then now in an international discussion, as you know, like a DORA declaration of the research assessment, the data management or data sharing or openness must be part of the important scientific achievement. And they are then creating a very excellent data set. It is cited 100 times or 500 times, then the scientist must be so recognized and to get the very good reputation, then the world should be changed. But we don't have the mechanism is working in the world. So we are in the transition. We are in a so painful time now, but we have to overcome this era. Yeah. So we are trying to work out to a better way to without less pains, the better benefit to the young scientists and the senior scientists. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I can conclude, my impression from what all you said is that one thing is the award system, definitely. And the second, which I must admit I fully agree with Jana, is the not only the award system, but also the system which encourages the collaboration as a complement to the competition within the research work. Because the award system itself, I mean, if you just add citations on the published data sets, doesn't lead directly to the change on the collaboration, and especially the way how the funding is distributed and accounting for. But I think that it is very important that within the EOSC, I mean, we are focusing more on the technology, but in fact, we have to also speak with those who are in a wider open science environment to understand that these effects are extremely important if what we would like to achieve within EOSC will actually happen. So that's one thing, and I have another thing. I mean, now, or Jana, if you want to comment, no? This time I will change the order, because the next question which I have is a question, again, we have here representatives of the national initiatives, or the national, slightly international, I mean, by just a specific one, IRENE. And the question is, what do you think is the best way how to, in fact, encourage collaboration, both horizontal and vertical, across all these initiatives? We had the opportunity to hear about the global, about the regional, I mean almost continental activities. Now we have national ones. And I would like to start with York, in fact, because I see with the NFDI that you have a plan to have 30 consortia after the third phase, and how you would like to deal with the risk of fragmentation. And for me, this is just a starting point for a wider discussion about how we make sure that after so many initiatives, so many people looking at it from different angles, we at the end will not end up with another fragmented way where perhaps the sharing will go across different roads, but at the end, again, the global sharing will not materialize. Jörg, if you can start.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very good question. And actually, a constant effort is needed from different sides to overcome fragmentations. First of all, maybe an NFDI answer, and then I put it into a wider perspective. Now, a consortium is already, you called it a silo, but at the end of the day, it's a whole community, right? So so there are many people coming together, and it's researchers and research infrastructure people. So it's not really fair to call this a silo. However,
I didn't use the word silo.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. But so there we have a first community building effort, and then within NFDI, yes, up to 30 of such consortia collaborate, and the sections are where we are addressing cross-cutting topics. And that is where we bring together the people from the various research domains with their knowledge, with their domain knowledge. They come together to deal with cross-cutting topics. And one of such cross-cutting topic, maybe technically speaking, is identity management. So EOSC is addressing it. And now we come to this question, how do we vertically and horizontally integrate? So we really need an identity management system for science. And we need this on the national levels, but also on the international levels. And my example here is EduRome. So a couple of years ago, suddenly it made click, and there was this really cool feature that you could use your university account and have access to wireless LAN in places like the airport in Oslo. And that for me was, I was sitting there, I opened my laptop, and suddenly emails came in, and I was like, I'm sitting here in Oslo at the airport. Why do emails come in? What happens? And then my laptop just automatically connected to this wireless LAN using my credentials from my home university. Nowadays, it seems like, yeah, it's there. We all use it without acknowledging that there was a time before. And I think it is the same with the services that we are intending now to build for the research data management. And if we are successful, these services will have a large adoption by many people, and we will share it across the borders of countries. And for that, we also need, for example, an identity management. And then we need the systems on a national level, but we need to link them on an international level. So there's lots of space for people doing the national organization and the provisioning of these services, and then we have to bring together it on a European level. I don't believe in central systems that are monolithic, by the way. I'm a computer scientist. I think decentralized systems have many advantages. And we can use this picture of decentralization for the integration of many activities horizontally and vertically.
Yeah. Thank you. Muriel, Sam?
Yes. For me, we may need to have some more precise analysis about the various kind of the data, various kind of scientific disciplines, and if we can find out a common component of the different disciplines, then we can work out for the horizontally connecting common platform idea can be realized on the analysis. And yeah, for vertically I think the more the experts from the scientific culture and the experts from the computer technology need to be work out together to what governance layer and what their infrastructure, physical infrastructure layers and work. We may need to have a new idea for that. Doesn't probably that question may not be very much best for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. But I think that you already presented some of the vertical collaboration in your presentation, I'm saying mentioning the Japan-European collaboration and this kind of stuff, which really extends the national activities toward much wider global initiative as well. Mark, any comment?
Actually, I would second York's highlighting on the authentication identity authorization piece. A couple of colleagues and I have been talking about this idea, what I call ResRoam. So it's, as York mentioned, the EduRoam thing that lets you attach to Wi-Fi pretty much anywhere these days. I think of a similar research roam kind of profile and service, which I think right now is exemplified by EOSC's AAI initiative and the task force that's moving that discussion forward. If I had to list the number one priority for me to dive into something in detail, it's AAI, because I think in a global interoperability context, that is one of the most advanced and critical frameworks we have. And I think once we have that, and we have the well-described data sets and metadata that accompany them, it not only would facilitate that kind of vertical and horizontal use across disciplines, but would also make it more accessible to AI and other machine readable type processes, which may well be better positioned to find the patterns between disparate, as far as we're concerned, completely unrelated or unconnected pieces of data. So I think that's a really critical component both for human access and machines.
Okay, thank you. Jana?
Thank you. I think we have to accept that we are operating in the multidimensional space. Many research infrastructures at the European or global level were developed bottom up because the opinion leaders in certain area started discussing the joint problems they are having, and they encouraged networking. Now we upgraded it higher. We are looking for those solutions you all mentioned that would serve and support the global or European efforts. But we still have to accept that there might be new challenges recognized at a fundamental level. So we still would rely on the opinion leaders in different areas, and many important things can happen at still the national level when 2-3 nodes would start talking together, trying to establish some national activity that can later serve as a model for some future development. So we'll communicate across all dimensions and levels, and it's fine.
I must admit again that I hope that this conference is also a kind of at least a small contribution to this kind of a communication. I mean, that the people will learn what's going on elsewhere and have hopefully some reflection that in fact they are doing something similar, that makes sense to start looking there and starting to elaborate, like you called for the extensive collaboration with the Canadian initiatives. And I think that this is extremely important contribution to this whole picture, to make really sure that we know what's going on elsewhere and not trying to reinvent the wheel again and again. Okay, no more questions from the audience. I don't see anything here. I have another question prepared for the panel, and this is the question about funding. We are speaking about the data sharing and research data sharing. We are speaking about research infrastructures, but in fact, at the same time, we are speaking about the societal impacts of all these activities, which go well beyond the actual research area. And one of the questions, because it was mentioned by quite a few of us, in fact, here, that the funding is important. Like Jörg said, that if more funding is available at the beginning, it may help. So the question is, what do you think we can do together or individually to actually go beyond just the research funding to support these more wider data sharing initiatives and activities, because otherwise we will always be limited, because there will always be the research funding is limited and has to be split also and given to the researchers themselves. What are just your opinion about the chance of getting this? And again, I will try to start now with Murayama-san. Yeah, it's a kind of surprise, okay. But for example, whether in Japan you are considering also other sources than the national research funds to support the data sharing, because it goes well beyond.
Yep. For Japan, unfortunately, at least a few years ago, we had only a scientific research budget from the national government. And many of the major research institutions and the research universities are all national. So national government policies are very much critical to make a decision of the investment and what kind of the facilities can be constructed. And so at that time, their database construction has been done under the name of the new scientific research director. Hey, so PI is trying to find carrying out this world top class science, and then getting budget, and they're making a data set and data management. And in these few years, Science Council of Japan made a document, if I remember correctly, their official document can include their scientific big project proposal or big project idea, and also scientific infrastructure too. And then my hope is that Japanese governments can make a good response to that Science Council of Japan about the budget distribution, the allocation to the data management, data infrastructure construction, and science research. So we are not very mature about that field.
Okay, thank you very much. Jörg, can you comment?
I mean, first of all, hopefully next wave of consortia will start next year. This will give additional funding in the long run. We see also popping up further initiatives. Despite you said there are all these initiatives, there are still coming more. And one interesting one is on data competencies. So now we are creating centers with expertise for data competency, and we spread this through the whole country. And this very nicely accompanies our efforts on the national data research data infrastructure, because it enables partners like universities to have staff which is dedicated towards data literacy courses and so on and so forth. And I think we need maybe we need yet another plan, what next funding steps we need so that the research data management becomes part of the daily research process. So, I mean, this comes back to all the questions we had before. If research data management and data sharing becomes the new normal, then we are there. But the new normal will require funding for infrastructure and for activities in the long run. And this has happened in the past with other things as well, which we nowadays take as granted. EIRENE was one example, but there in the science, there are many such examples. And I think right now we have initiatives who see the next step, that is creating infrastructures, but we are not yet in the phase where we fully understood what does it mean to sustain these activities on a global scale for all scientists.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Jana, do you want to comment?
I'm thinking of the stakeholders, because this is not only about data management and curation, but also interpretation. And we are not making the data available to the scientists only, but it should also go to the public, to the industry. And all of them also invest a lot of money in developing their own systems. So maybe better collaboration in that field. Just a little example. I mentioned the Living Lab in my presentation, that we are trying to work with the city or with the region. They are developing their, various information systems, sharing the data. They are even attempting to share the scientific data and show why it is good to live in such a scientific and innovation hub. They are more than willing to develop some visualization interpretation tool if we are willing to really pick the interesting data and make them available. So this is probably true also for development of various models. The users are ready to do some work for us. We don't necessarily have to bring it on the golden plate to them. So maybe we can explore that end.
Yeah, thank you. Mark?
For me, I think the key is, we can probably agree that the level of funding globally for research infrastructures or research is going to stay relatively constant or go up and down a little bits here and there. For me, the key is to have new and creative lenses through which to view the research funding context. So the two examples that I've been excited about most recently, one is the Global Biodata Coalition, which recently completed the first stage of their global core biodata resource selection process, which I participated in. And it's a really, I think, important development in taking a set of international funders who are funding biodata resources, knowledge bases or data repositories, and trying to create a process to determine which of these are core. In other words, which of these, if they disappeared tomorrow, would severely constrain the research that those who depend upon them undertake. And then once that process, which does have an element of competitive selection to it, it's more peer review, Once that part is done, then the funders would look at how they can achieve a more sustainable long-term approach to funding those core resources. So that's one really, I think, important recent example which came out of the EMBL community and the work they had done. And then the other one is the international collaboration by funders. And I typically think of that in the research software context, because unlike HPC and physical gears and all those kinds of things which have to sit somewhere, research software is virtual. It can float around anywhere, it can be used anywhere, it can be modified by anyone. So so there's a number of initiatives, many of them under the Research Software Alliance kind of guidance, that are working with international research funders to try to figure out how we can better approach a more collaborative funding model to fund these important existing or emerging research software platforms and other kinds of research software to again ensure that they benefit from a process that is focused on those kinds of infrastructures rather than trying to fit those kinds of infrastructures into our traditional competitive research innovation pipeline, which tends to be the only lens we view these things through and have viewed for such a long time.
Okay, thank you. Because we are near the end, I will probably abstain from my last question. I will only tell you what it was, and then I will give the freedom to the panelists whether they would like to react. Otherwise, I would like only to ask them to say a few last words to that. And my last question to them was, imagine that you stay in front of the secondary school students, and you have to explain why data sharing is important, or in fact crucial, for the future of the healthy society. We already have this in one of the slides, the healthy society future. So what you will tell them to convince them to actually become the new workforce for which this data sharing is a norm? But otherwise, this is the question. I am giving the freedom to all the panelists to either react or not. And I will start again with the remote participants to tell the last words and eventually to react on this question. So, Murayama-san, please, if you can, last words and eventually the reaction.
Okay, yeah, that's we have to do so real education about what's the real science, and in my experience there, so even high school or some lower years of their universities, there were no that kind of the education about the what is really science. Science is science, and I would like to say that, for instance, science is very troublesome process, taking time consuming, and we have to collect many evidences to say something for this science topic. Then so those evidences are all the basis of what you will say in a scientific context. And I'm not sure this can be accepted by the secondary school.
Yeah, I will, because we have to move forward. Yeah, I would say yes, the science is difficult, and the data sharing will make it more cool. Jörg.
Dear students, by sharing data, you will ensure that research results are being produced faster, that we can solve all the crises and problems that we have with much more power from research, and that politicians will make better decisions. So just do it.
That's a nice thing. Thank you very much. Mark?
I would ask them to do what I would ask any researcher to do. Draw a picture of your favorite, the most important or favorite thing in your brief lifetime, a toy, a computer game console, whatever it is. Draw a picture of what it meant to you when it was the most important thing to you, and then draw a picture of what it would mean to others if you were able to find a way to let it go, and share it with them, and then draw a third picture of what it would look like after all those other people the same age as you had a chance to experience that same valuable thing that you loved when you were whatever age it was.
Okay, thank you. And Jana?
Be team leaders rather than single runners would be the message, because this is what we want. We don't want to kill the competitiveness, but still they need to be able to work in the team. So the sharing of data is just the part of the bigger sharing, the way how they operate.
And I will take the privilege to have my own proposal to this. And my proposal would be for the college, look at the YouTubers. They share their private life and they are making money. You will get the same here as well. And that's, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to Japan, thank you to Germany, and we are at the end.